Welcome to The Bottom Line with Eric Bauer, a podcast that explores the intersection of storytelling, communication, and influence. In each episode, we sit down with leaders, creatives, and communicators who are shaping how stories are told. People who understand how to move an audience, spark a conversation, and leave a lasting impression. Because at the heart of great marketing, powerful leadership, and meaningful change is a story worth telling.
Welcome to The Bottom Line, where we explore the intersection of leadership, strategy, and communications. In this episode, I am very excited to be joined by one of the most influential minds in Canadian public relations, Dr. Terry Flynn. Terry is an accredited PR professional, a former agency leader, a CEO, a longtime academic at McMaster University, and the driving force behind the Master of Communications Management program. Terry's career has spanned politics, consulting, crisis communications, and academia. And in this conversation, we cover it all. From his early days working on Parliament Hill, to launching a boutique crisis communications firm, to helping define what strategic communications means in an era of AI, disinformation, and rapid change. We dig into what it takes to become a trusted advisor and a leader at the table, and why communicators need to think like operators, and how to prepare for a future where context and judgment, not just data, will be our superpowers. So without any further ado, let's dig into it. So Terry, thank you very much for joining us today. Really excited to have this conversation with you. You have accomplished so much in your career, and there's so many different avenues that I want to kind of go down in this conversation. Maybe we can just start, though, by having you give us a little bit of your background in terms of where you came from, what you're doing now, and what your road, your career sort of trajectory in the road has looked like for you.
So there was no official game plan. I mean, the only game plan I had was when I was 14 years old, my dad was elected a member of parliament. And I thought, wow, that seems like a really cool thing to kind of do. And so I did my undergraduate studies at Carleton in political science and law, and had the opportunity to work for a federal cabinet minister for 2 years at the end of the Pierre Trudeau regime from 82 to 84. And really loved it. Got a lot of grounding in issues management, media relations from a political communication standpoint. The guy I worked for ran for leader after Trudeau stepped down, and so I ran the operations of his leadership campaign at the age of 25. So I got a great foundation in events, organization, project management. And then, of course, in September 4th of 1984, not that I remember that exactly, but I do, Brian Mulroney's government ended my Ottawa time, and I had to look for a real job, and I had the fortune of replacing a colleague of mine who had worked in an agency, a very small agency in Toronto called MDC, run by a guy by the name of Miles Nadell, who went on to do bigger and not so good things. But again, same kind of thing, account management, worked on some high tech stuff, and then had the good fortune of meeting a woman from Newfoundland who didn't want to live in Toronto. And so my brother worked at an agency in Kitchener, and I started their PR shop in 1987. And same kind of thing, just sort of built a business. I didn't have any formal communications training, so I didn't take any communications courses at Carleton, even though many of my colleagues and friends went into journalism or communications because they had a really solid program there. So I was kind of learning it from the back seat, watching and observing. I had some really good mentors at MDC who really kind of helped me show the way. And, I think I'm the seventh of 9 kids. So my dad would always say, you just show up, be present, put your hand up and do things, and say yes. And that's what I did. And I think because of the political skills that I gained in Ottawa. I think because of my awareness of what times in politics teach you are what I now call these horizontal skills. This term I use is horizontality. You're able to see sort of from the bird's eye perspective, and you're able to bring issues to the table that, perhaps a lot of other communicators or marketers just don't see, right? Because they're a little bit too tunnel visioned in many respects. So I was recruited away from that firm to another firm, and then recruited back to that firm, and then working for a man who, I had one of those kind of come to Jesus moments, who I didn't respect. He was the owner of the agency, and I questioned his decisions on many, many things. And so I had a volunteer career in the Chamber of Commerce movement, rose to become the president of the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Kitchener-Waterloo at the age of 34. And I got to meet a lot of pretty pivotal business leaders in the Kitchener-Waterloo area who said, well, just go out on your own, do your own thing. And I thought, what, are you crazy? Like, I'm not an entrepreneur. I never had that kind of desire. But they convinced me that, it's possible. I had built a strong book of business at this agency, and I had a conversation with my wife. Our second child had just been born. This is in the fall of 1993, and she said, why not? I mean, what's the least that we could do? Yeah, we'd have to move into an apartment building. Like, if it wasn't successful, we'd have to repivot, and so she, as a very smart nurse, just gave me some really practical advice and said, go for it. This might be great for you. So I started a company called Frontline on November 8th, 1993, and clients found me. And within, a very short order, I had started growing a business, a communications firm out of Kitchener. And same kind of thing, your clients took you to different places. They introduce you to different people. If you do good work, they're going to be pounding their chest. And we got the opportunity to, showcase some of the community relations work I was doing in the chemical industry. That opened doors into the US. And then within a very short order, I was on the road 150 days a year. We opened up an office in Memphis, Tennessee, did a lot of work in environmental remediation, environmental communications throughout the US, did work with the US government, the US military, because they had huge sites all over the world that we were working on. And also then started a couple businesses. A number of my good friends, people I also met along the way in the environmental communications cleanup business. We started an environmental remediation company. So by the time, within short order, we were up to 20 people, and we were doing significant billings. And I was spending more of my time in the US, like 75% of my time was in the US at a time when the Canadian dollar was at about 64 cents. So it was a pretty profitable venture there. And I could do it from home. I didn't have to, we had an office in Memphis, Tennessee. I had staff there. I'd have to travel there at least 1 week a month and do that. But my wife asked the pivotal question. She said, is this how it's going to be? Like, from now on? I was just about to turn 40. And I said, what would you ultimately like to do? And I said, I think I have enough experience. I'd like to teach, but I have a bachelor's degree. I have to get a bit more paper. And in the mid 90s, Syracuse University was starting this executive master's program in communication management. And so I'd gotten a flyer somehow. I was a member of PRSA. That's probably how I got it. And I kept it on my desk. And I thought, okay, well, I think I should do a graduate degree. And then I started looking around, and the only options in Canada were MBAs. And for sure, I didn't feel like I had the means to be able to do an MBA. I mean, again, the last math class I had was in grade 13, and I certainly wasn't strong in math or numeracy. And they were doing these, weekends forever. Well, we had young kids. I'm traveling 150 days a year. I'm going to go and spend the weekends doing schoolwork. I thought, that's not going to work. Then I looked at Syracuse brochure again, and it said, 1 week a term, you can come down to Syracuse. And it's interesting. My family had a love affair with Syracuse because one of my brother's best friends played football there in the early 1970s. So it was this mythical place. So I went down and did the interview, got accepted into the program. My first day of classes was on my 40th birthday. So some guys go out and buy sports cars. I decided to spend whatever amount of money it cost at that point to do my degree. And at that point, the purpose was really just to explore the opportunity. Could this get me something else? There was also a growing need on RFPs in the United States where they were wanted the educational background of the principals. And I was competing with people that had, a couple of master's degrees, they had PhDs. And so I felt that I needed something. And I also needed to, this will allow me to really understand what's happening in the communications field. Everything I've been doing is gut instinct. Everything is just through personal experiences and what I had. And so that opened the door to really a whole exploration of these theories. And I fell in love with it. And so at some point during the journey, so my business is a going concern. We've got 10 people on the communication side, now about 20 people on the environmental side.
And can I ask, were
Then
you were still running those businesses while you
100%,
were going back to school? Yeah,
100%. Yeah. So this is the whole point, just like our MCM program, you do it while you're working, right? So all I had to be there is 1 week at a time. And then the rest of it there was a little bit of online in those days. That was 1999. So, but I had a conversation with Stephanie. I said, okay, if I want to do this teaching thing, I want to do a PhD because I want to teach at a university. I don't want to teach at a community college because I want to be engaged with the research. I want to move the research needle forward because I had read it, I'd been exposed to it, and I'd met these people at conferences, and I thought, wow, this would be great. So I took an educational leave from my company. I gave two of my senior leaders phantom shares, so they ran the company while I was down there. They paid me while I was there. It was the only way you really could afford to do it, because a $20,000 stipend to do your PhD a year. And my wife couldn't work as a nurse in New York State because she'd had to get relicensed. So it was, it was a decision at that point that okay, this is a real pivot time. And while I was doing it, I thought my consulting career, I think, is going to end, but I can't tell my staff that yet. So we did the degree. We weren't going to move. We sold everything in Canada because I had a company. We repositioned myself within that company so I could do it and live in the States. But we weren't going to come back because I thought, 20 years of experience, PhD, we can go anywhere in the US that we want. Like, let's pick a place where it's great for family and everything. Mm-hmm. We moved on June 1st, 2001. And September 11th happened and the world changed. And to say that my kids were young, 10, 8, and 5, my wife couldn't get back to Canada fast enough. And so that was the whole, okay, we're going to go home. I want to come home. I didn't want to live in the States. But what do we do then? And so I decided to sell the company to my senior leaders. The other company, the environmental company, was actually bought by another engineering company. So it was a perfect timing for it as well. And I thought, I'm going to pivot into an academic career. And through Syracuse, and at that time, Mike Harris had opened up the education field to international universities to come and operate in Ontario. So we looked at a partnership with a Canadian university to replicate the MCM degree that Syracuse had started, and did some interviews with a number of universities to see if they were interested. And McMaster was the one that sort of said, oh, yeah, sure, we'll do this. So that was 21 years ago.
Wow. I mean, there's 1,000 questions I could ask you kind of coming off of that, but what a journey. the one thing that comes to mind for me is like that's a lot of real crucial decision making at several times in your career, right? I mean, from going, working in the political realm to making a decision that you're going to pivot, you're going to work in the agency world for a while, then making that secondary pivot into the world of entrepreneurship, and then at 40, repositioning and saying, okay, I'm going to totally go in another direction and follow up on academia. Like, what gave you, I don't know if courage is the right word, but what gave you, the confidence to say to yourself, I'm going to make these, big career decisions at a time when, I'm 40 right now, and I put myself in your shoes. I've got two young kids. If I'm, running two successful companies that are profitable and growing, to me, like my focus is let's double down on this, as opposed to you, who you made the decision to completely pivot and reinvent yourself at 40. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Um, Ignorance, maybe. maybe it's, maybe it's, the political pivot was survival. I mean, I didn't have a job anymore, right? The
Yeah.
government was defeated, and I thought it was a time to kind of say, okay, from the age of 14 to 25, kind of did that, right? I lived the life of a son of an MP. I got to study it. I got to live it. I worked for a wonderful person, gave me great opportunity. And I didn't want to be a hanger-oner. So I knew in my own mind, I didn't want to be a lifer and politically, Mulroney's victory in 2000 or 1984 was massive. So looking to think, I'm not going to be like a backbench MP, opposition
Yeah.
research assistant, don't want to do that. I couldn't pivot into the government because I didn't have enough years of service at that point. So it's interesting. One of my good friends, high school friends that I had recruited up to Ottawa, he got this notion: we should take our severance package, we should fly to Hong Kong because we'd met some people in our politics that were entrepreneurs, and we should start an import business from Hong Kong. So we went and spent actually a month in Hong Kong in October of 1984, and then we realized that
Wow.
we can't do this. We have no money, right? It's like this is impossible. So we came back, and I thought, okay, well, I got to survive. I got to, I moved back to Toronto. I moved to Toronto. I did something that probably, a lot of people wouldn't think about it. I'd never had a kind of summer off. So I thought, I want to have like a summer off, but I need to pay the bills. So I became a waiter at it was called Pat and Mario's at Yonge and Eglinton. And I'd never been a waiter before. And it's like, oh, it was probably one of the most challenging jobs I'd ever had, because there you're selling yourself at every table. I mean,
Yeah.
what my dad taught us, all of us, um, is to be a good communicator. He gave us opportunities, put us up front, shove us. We were at our church, we were readers at very young ages, and in leadership was really important. So I knew I was confident about my communication skills. Wasn't confident about selling. I'd never sold anything in my life, right? But the more you felt confident that, what, throw something at me, I think I can do that. I never saw failure as a bad word. So every time that opportunity, I always left doors open. I never burned any bridges. The company I worked for in Toronto recruited me back twice, Miles Nadell's company, um, because I did good work and I was a good person, and I just put my hand up all the time, and I made my clients really happy, right? So I think that always carried the opportunity that failure is a part of growth, that even if you do make a mistake, then you learn from it. Then you also marry somebody that also lifts you up. And
Yeah.
I know that when I was and when I ran my company, Stephanie was able to take a leave from her work and take care of the things at home. I remember getting her business cards, and I called her the CHO, and she was the chief household officer. She made all those decisions. I made the other decisions, and so I think you know looking up. I never did a strategic plan or a business analysis on any of those cases. I just thought, why not try it? Right? What's the least you could what could happen? Okay, well, it didn't work. We moved back, right? I hadn't sold the company at that point. So there was always that door open for me to return. It would have been costly because we sold everything. We'd have to rebuy, so, but I think if you put yourself in a place to be successful, meaning that you're a good person, you build yourself a strong group of good people. My clients were tremendous clients. They built my business. I had one person in the US. It was probably worth 75% of my overall revenues, right? Just because I made them look good, right?
Yeah.
So they knew that if I brought him, the reason why we had an office in Memphis is because he and I were doing these audits of community relations programs for the US governments and the US military. And we went down to Memphis, and it was just an absolute failure. People were protesting in front of this site. I said, well, I don't think we have to spend a lot of time here. Let's go get some barbecue and we can go back home, because if people are protesting, your community relations aren't really working. And through our 2 days of auditing, the people there said, well, could you guys do it? And Rick turned to me, he says, could you do it? I said, sure. Like, I never done community relations in Memphis, Tennessee before, but I mean, the fundamentals were all the same that way. And that guy, I made him look like a champion, right? So he, in his chain of command, he was seen as, brilliant, on the leading edge of stuff. And so I think you're a good person and you do good things and you're authentic and you're humble. I think the world tries to help you along the way, right? It's like Rory said yesterday after he won the Masters. I got all the lucky bounces. He says, I kind of deserve those over the years. Like, so,
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes you get the bounces, right? Yeah. Was it all peachy keen? Hell no. Right. I mean, there were times in my early days as a company, because I wanted to also be the president of the Chamber of Commerce, that I was dipping into, like, we had a huge line of credit. I was dipping into the line of credit because I wasn't doing the business stuff. Like, those hours as a consultant, I'm giving 20 hours over to this organization, hopefully as an investment. Hopefully
Yeah.
that's going to come back somehow. It didn't really come back in business, but it came back in relationships and reputation. And so that you cash in those early investments down. But I had the means through those relationships to have a relationship with a banker who gave me a line of credit that I could, he knew that I was a good risk, and sure, it paid off. I'm still with that bank 30 years later, 33 years later. So,
Yeah.
I think that's what the kind of stuff you have to think about. Having a plan is great. Having, understanding what the consequences could be. And Stephanie and I talked about this. What happens if it doesn't work? I'm going to do a PhD. Oh my God, I don't know what a PhD is like. What if
Yeah.
we go down there and it's just a big, you don't want to do it anymore? Well, I can do business.
Yeah.
Right. So leaving yourself available for some other things, right? So having your foot in both worlds, that's the safety net, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I love that approach, right? I think a lot of times when you're faced with big decisions like that, you think to yourself, what if? But you think of it in terms of the what if in a negative sense, right? As opposed to, well, what if it doesn't work out? Well, you know, back to square one. There's always an option. There's always a plan B, right? And I think having your spouse obviously is so critical in terms of, I just read Scott Galloway's book, The Algebra of Happiness, and say
Mm.
what you will about the guy. One of his big, I guess, theories is that the biggest decision, most important decision from a happiness, but a wealth perspective as well, is who you marry, right? And how you kind of approach that relationship and the support you get. And it sounds like for you, that was pivotal as well, right? Having I guess, a partner by your side who is encouraging you to take risks and having that mentality that even if things don't work out, what's the worst that could happen? And that sounds like it was instrumental in terms of your career success over and over.
Well, and unlike Scott, who I love Scott Galloway, I'm still married to the same woman after 38 years. So I've been pretty lucky. Um, and also think, I don't want to miss the opportunity. I'm 7 of 9 kids. My dad was an Irish immigrant. He grew up poor in Toronto. He happened to marry above his pay grade, a wonderful, daughter of Irish, her grandparents were Irish immigrants as well. A strong faith in who they were. They had a strong bond. So that's important as an example as well. My dad was in the Navy. He trained as a medic. He became chief of the X-ray department at a hospital in Kitchener, but he changed jobs like people would change underwear. He went from sales and pharmaceuticals to sales and liquor. He was in public relations. He was the chair of a school board, and at the age of 53, he put himself out there and ran to be a member of parliament.
Wow.
And my oldest brother, at the age of 29, working for a senior position in a construction company, moved his family to Ottawa to do his law degree at 29. Right, and he had two kids. One of my other brothers worked in the Ontario Public Service, and he started off as a clerk in the LCBO, became senior vice president of customer service at LCBO, and then was recruited away, became senior vice president at OLG with a high school degree. And so I look at my family, it's just like, just go and do it, right? Be good people, do good work, be humble about the work you do, thank the people that have helped you get to where you are, and don't ever assume that you're the most important person in the room, because you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I think so many good life lessons there for the listeners, and I think, yeah, I mean, an incredible journey. And I just want to say, I love the approach. I think it's very inspiring for me, for someone who is, as I said, I just turned 40 this year. I've got two young kids, so kind of putting myself in the mindset of where you would have been at that point in your life. Kudos to you for taking those big risks, and obviously, they've paid off for you, which is exciting. And I do want to talk a little bit about the MCM and a little bit more about academia. I was one of those guys that went back to school after I had been working and did my MBA. So from I think it was 2012 to 2016, took me about 4 years to do my MBA, part-time, evenings and weekends, and it was a grind. And so I can totally commiserate with people who are in that situation and the commitment that it takes. And at that time, I was working in communications, and I knew that I wanted to deepen my understanding of other areas of the business. But I've always wondered if there was another option like the MCM out there. Would I have gone in that direction? So talk to me a little bit about that, and talk to me about the MCM program in general, and how it has developed, what the real benefits are for communicators, and sort of, I guess, the genesis around it. Because it really is a unique program offering in Canada. It's a one of a kind as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it is. There are other master's programs in communications across the country. Most universities have MA in communication studies. Most of those are theoretical and a pathway to further studies. A lot of people who go through that are looking to do maybe a PhD in communications. Their perspective is more critical cultural, and so they're looking at it from a different perspective. There's some really good programs there for those that are looking for that. There are two other professional graduate programs. Mount St. Vincent University has a Master's of Public Relations. And Mount St. Vincent's, you have to give them huge kudos, because they were the first bachelor's program in Canada to specialize in public relations, developed in the early 80s as well. So they're a foundational university, and their program has produced a lot of great people in our field as well. On the West Coast, Mount Royal Roads University has a master's in professional communications. It's geared to people who are looking to transition their whole model of residency and then course-based learning as well. Again, a little bit more on the critical cultural side, but they've done some really, really great work. So no program found its way to combine both business and communications together. And when the Syracuse program, when the dean of the Syracuse University knew that I was going back to Canada, said, "Hey, why don't we open up a program there?" And I said, "That's not the way to do it. Let's partner with somebody. Let's partner with a business school to bring that business part of it with it, because that was foundational in the program I took there. The core business courses of accounting, finance, strategy, and marketing, because that's the language of business, right? That and not just business, organizations, right? Doesn't matter if you're in the public service or public sector, not for profit, or the corporate world. You have to understand how organizations operate, and that's been missing in our field up until the 90s. People were being graduated, they were coming in through masters of communications or masters of journalism, and they knew communications from a tactical perspective really well. Great writers, great media relations, great creatives, but they weren't advancing within organization leadership because they didn't have the secret sauce. And the secret sauce is being able to understand, right? Talk the language, know what it means to operate a P&L, and to be able to move forward through that. So our program really, we position it as, the school for future communications leaders. The people who are our graduates are people who want to become the CCOs, the chief communications officers in organizations. They've done the tactical, they've proven themselves, they know they run it, but they're not being looked at seriously for senior level director, vice president roles in organizations, because they're missing that basic business literacy, right? Numeracy, on strategy, lack of strategy, right? There were no strategic, and actually teaching undergraduate students strategic management doesn't really work because they don't have the life skills, they don't have the life experiences to really understand what that means. So you need to do it in a really, like in an MBA fashion. That's where you do it. So our program, we've just finished, our 211th student has finished their capstone. So that cohort will graduate in June. So we have about 250 students that are alum and graduates of the program. And if I look at where they are, when we started to say, when I came in 2004 to start the program and then launch it in 2007, I said, we want to see people in leadership positions in organizations, people in thought leadership positions in the professional sector as well, people who are researching and publishing and presenting at conferences. And that's where we are. We've got people who are chief communication officers at in the private sector, at the university level, in hospitals. A number of them actually have gone on to start their own businesses. One is a president of a hospital, and we have people in thought leadership position in IBC and CPRS across the country. And if you look at when I started to look at my dissertation in 2003, I started thinking, okay, what was my topic? It was going to be the state of public relations in Canada, sort of the benchmark study. And I started doing a literature review, and there were 2 articles. I thought, well, you can't do a literature review on 2 articles. So I had to change mine. Well, now there's lots of information. Any one of our 211 capstones are empirical, research-driven papers that could be used to further it. What was lacking in 2004 was evidence about the profession in Canada. There was lots of evidence about the profession in the United States. There was a growing body of knowledge of evidence in Europe, in Africa, in Brazil, South America, but there was nothing in Canada. And so, part of my driving force was to make to be a profession, you have to have a recognized body of knowledge, right? And that body of knowledge has to be evidentiary, has to give people a sense of what these means of practice are. If I want to do a community relations plan, what's the research tell me about what these kind of things? When I was doing my master's at Syracuse, I was also hired by the town of Walkerton to help them with their water crisis. And, I had this thing in the back of my mind saying, why is it in these kind of situations, these community groups that weren't there before, all of a sudden emerge? They control the political and governmental and media agenda, and then they go away. Like, what is this? And sure enough, if you go to psychology or sociology, there's a whole theory on emergent groups emerging through these kind of things. So I took some of that and embedded that not only into Wakanen, but in my future work that I did as well. Then, okay, we have to be on the lookout for this. There are groups here that are coalescing. How can we get involved with those groups? How can we give those groups information? How can we help those groups get the information or resources? So that's what I wanted to do, and sure enough, I think what we've done this just conference season this year, we've had 2 people present at the International Public Relations Conference in Orlando. We had 3 people present at the Bridge Conference, the Institute for Public Relations in Washington last week. And we have 2 people presenting at BLEDCOM, which is a European conference in Lake Bled, Slovenia in July. So, I mean, nobody else is doing that. And that's what I'm most proud of, right? These students have taken their research, and different from most MBA programs where it's course-based, right? The capstone in our MBA MCM program could be, there are some that have done equal to PhD dissertations, right? They've done tremendous jobs. Amber Doherty wants to know why we don't have a measurement culture in Canada in public relations. And so she did a survey. She had like 150 respondents on her survey, but she interviewed 30 leaders in the measurement and assessment industry, right? And came out with the fact is that, yeah, we don't have a culture here. We don't have a measurement culture here. That's why we don't have one, is because we don't have one, right? Because most of it, we look at the vast array of people who are practicing in the field. They work for not-for-profits, they work for public sector, they work for universities, governments, and there's not a culture of measurement there. There's not a culture of evaluation. Or if they're evaluating, they're using vanity metrics that don't mean anything. So that's a pretty important part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great conversation and a great area of discussion. I've always wondered like why communications has been overlooked by academia. I know when I did my MBA, I mean, I had classes on brand management, I had classes on strategy, obviously marketing. I can count on one hand the amount of times communications was part of the discussion, and I always wondered, and now 10 plus years later, I continue to wonder, why was communications not, more sort of intertwined in the conversations that we were having in the classroom? Because it's so pivotal, not just to practitioners of communications, but to executives and leaders. I mean, if you are not a good communicator, your ability to be a good leader, the ability to be a good CEO it's impacted, right? Yeah. Why do you think it is that McMaster's figured this out? You've kind of put the dots together, so to speak. But why is there a gap?
Figured it out.
Yeah.
So I taught in the MBA program for 7 years. So our program initially started in the Groot School of Business, and we then moved over to the Faculty of Humanities in 2011. For a number of reasons. One, we had a bit of a civil war within the Faculty of Business. And number 2, the people that were evaluating the work that I was doing didn't think it was worthy enough to be in a business school. So there was academic bias and why that is happening. When I taught in the business school, I introduced a course on crisis communications, a course on reputation management, and a course on public relations. So it was the only MBA program in Canada that had 3 of those. Why? Because I was there. And when I left, one course hung on, crisis, I think, and somebody turned the reputation course into a brand course, but nobody else picked it up that way. There's academic bias. Why? I mean, there are silos. I was told in the business school I'd never get tenure there because you don't publish in our journals. So you got to go and get published in journals, or you got to go move to a faculty where you can be recognized for the work you're doing. And that's in the Faculty of Humanities, right? So there are these academic silos that are really hard to move, right? Um, we've tried many things at our university. It would be the same as others. I spent 2 years working on a Master of Science Communications degree program with the Faculty of Science, Faculty of Humanities, and Faculty of Health Sciences, and it never went anywhere because of silos. No, they don't operate well together in terms of managing that way.
Yeah.
So it never, 2 years of great work and never happened. So the academy is 700 years old, 800 years old. We've always done it this way. Business teaches about business. Communications could be in a faculty of social sciences or faculty of arts, humanities in our case. So we were just lucky. And one of the biggest aha moments I had was when I was teaching in the MBA program. I said, if these people could ever get communications, communicators would be out of business. They would absolutely be out of business because they already know the secret sauce. They know how to measure things. Every question they ask is about, how do we know that? How do we measure that? How do we evaluate that? Right? Those are questions that rarely are asked in typical graduate programs, right? Typical undergraduate programs in communications. Not talking about how do we evaluate things. So, but the irony of it, human nature being what it is, they aren't good communicators. They don't get good, right?
Yeah.
There's maybe in my 7 years there's a handful of people that I thought, well, you're an excellent communicator. You'll be a CEO one day. There's no doubt about it. But
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? And as a result of that, I still feel like you see those gaps in the boardroom as well, right? Where many managers, many CEOs, they're fantastic operators and they're good at running the business, but when it comes to communications, there's still a bit of a disconnect there. And I think that is something that ties directly back to the way that business is taught,
yeah.
university, grad school, MBA, and upwards. So it's an interesting concept. I want to ask you about another kind of hot button topic when it comes to education, and that is obviously the shuttering of so many postgraduate PR programs in Ontario specifically. So for those listeners who are not aware, there's been a lot of legislative changes around international students, and as a result, enrollments have really dropped, and many colleges and universities have shuttered their PR and corporate communications programs over the last 6 months. So I wanted to get your take on that and how you think that change will affect our industry.
So I think what we've just experienced is a bubble, a significant bubble within the PR education over the last 5 years, right? Before this explosion of the growth of international students in the college program specifically, we were churning out probably in Ontario maybe 100 graduate students or postgraduate students as well. And I think there was enough room in the industry to be able to take those students on. And there were some really good programs, and then there were some weak programs that probably should have shuttered a long time ago. But
Yeah.
they were able to get 10 or 15 students that way. The the growth with international students, I think, was a false paradigm, it's false economy. Um, and they made a lot of money on those students as well, and nobody was asking the question, what happens when this goes away? How have we pivoted ourselves? How have we prepared ourselves to be able to survive when somebody realizes that we just can't have this happen anymore? So, well, in many respects, it is a travesty to lose programs like the Centennial program that has been around for 45 years. It's not a travesty to lose some of these other programs, because I think I think they were weaker sisters to some of the other stronger programs. The challenge now is that it's just been a bandwagon effect, right? That, you know, Southern Ontario, beyond Kitchener-Waterloo, Fanshawe just closed theirs as well. I don't know, to Lambton, St. Clair, I don't think they had programs there, so there's nothing there. So the Strongs have survived, right?
Yeah.
So you have the Humber program. Seneca is continuing on, and it's almost like 1980. all over again, right? So that's where it is. Conestoga still has a couple programs that they have. So you have to ask yourself the question: how many postgrad graduates can our industry actually take in on a year-to-year basis? So yeah, while we were pumping out a lot of these graduates, how many of them were actually obtaining meaningful work in the sector?
Yeah.
So it's a big correction. It's a massive correction. There are some people, some of these programs that have done really, really good work, but haven't been able to survive through this. I think what you should see out, this maybe in 3 or 4 years, are stronger programs as a result of it. I still think that the college sector is in such a mess that even some of the good programs could be axed just because senior administrators are making stupid decisions, right? They're not looking at what are the ones that are going to be able to pivot the college into a digital sector, right? Communications should be a viable program because that's where society is. Digital communications. We should be giving media literacy, digital communications courses to anybody that's in secondary, post-secondary, maybe elementary school. So everything that we do today rests on some kind of communications channel. So how are we positioned to do that? And then the graduate programs. And again, I think colleges, universities a little bit different because we don't have the means to be able to open those doors as quickly as colleges. You have to go through a big long process, and there's inertia that happens. So I think hopefully the great programs that have survived will continue to survive, will continue to educate the future leaders of our programs, and that it's about economies of scale. We don't have the same number of people that are practicing as the United States, and our structure. People always ask me, well, what about licensing? I say, well, licensing is done on a provincial basis. We
Yeah.
don't have the economies of scale in Canada to have 13 different provincial boards licensing public relations people. It's not going to happen. So that'll never happen. So what can we do to continue to strengthen it? And we invest in ensuring that our graduates, people that are graduating the program or entering the program, have the requisite competencies and skills and knowledge as well. And Linda is right. Those colleges have been wonderful training grounds for the field, right? They got to pick the best and the brightest because, first of all, she runs a great agency. But those are the places, right? They'll still be able to pick the best and the brightest, but it'll be from Seneca, Humber, Conestoga, really in those kind of ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very much aligned with you. I think that the oversaturation of those programs, and I think the amount of students that were enrolled, I think this will be a good thing for the industry. Maybe not in the short term, but certainly in the medium to
Yeah.
long term, as those programs become more competitive, the quality of students that they're turning out becomes more, more sort of job placement ready. And so I think it's going to take a little bit of time, and I do think there's going to be some casualties along the way. But net, I do feel like there was a problem with the industry. There was a problem with obviously over admitting to a certain extent. And I do think that a correction was needed. It's maybe overcorrected, but net, I do think it's going to be a good thing for the industry. And then I guess the question becomes, how do employers, how do, us just as industry practitioners, how do you bridge the gap in the meantime, right? How do you ensure that good talent finds its way into the job market? And I don't know what the answer is for that, but I do think, mid to long term, this will be a good thing for PR and comms in Canada.
Yeah, I think people who are hiring have to look at what are the competency, skills, and knowledges that we need in entry level. Now, that's a whole different podcast because that's been, as we talked about in this AI, that is the one that is at greatest risk because of the automation of some of those tasks that had traditionally been done. So how do we ensure that those people that are coming out of a university, and I've been on both sides of the street. I think my view is that a good liberal arts degree is a good foundation for you to go into a postgraduate specialization. I'm a little loath to have that specialization at the undergraduate level because I think you need to take different types of courses, right? And and you're still pretty young when you're coming out, that you can have a specialization and a postgraduate afterwards. So that system worked really well. But if it doesn't mean that somebody can come out of an undergraduate degree with a liberal arts humanities degree and can't go into communications. There's still a number of them that are doing that. But what do they have? Well, they're great communicators as they are as a young person. They have a huge worldview. They have that horizontality. They have the drive and desire. So they've done LinkedIn learning courses. They've built their resume. They've got the digital competencies. They've got the financial literacy. So they come as a complete package saying, yeah, I don't need to go to a postgrad, right? I need maybe the training that I got in, when I went into the agency business in 1986, again, I never wrote a news release in my life. I actually took a postgrad course, not a diploma, just a couple of courses at Ryerson on how to business writing. Right? It's like I had to learn this kind of stuff. But businesses mentored you, right? And maybe the agency world or the corporate world, maybe we counted too much on those postgraduate programs to do the training.
Yeah.
So maybe we're going to have to develop our own training programs, right? What do we need? What do we need to show? How do we need to build the kind of person that we want to see within this industry? How do we give those opportunities? So I don't think it's not the end of the road for us. It's about how do we do it, and this is where industry from us, professional associations need to get together. We got together 15 years ago to talk about the Pathways Project. What are the kind of pathways that students should take? I think we need to revise that again. Challenge with it is professional societies now is that COVID really did volunteerism badly. We're lacking in really strong, committed volunteers. Professional societies have sort of given up on that really low-hanging fruit professional development because it's available online for free for anybody. So there's no exclusivity on that knowledge. So they've got to really figure out what that is. But there's enough, that CPRS is launching at the May conference, the Thought Leadership Council. And it's a number of us who've gotten together and say, what do we need to advance the thinking skills of senior leaders? How do we make them think about purpose, about horizontal perspectives? How do we give them ideas about change communications, right? About social advocacy. So that's the relationship between research, academia, and professional activities need to be closer because we can build bonds of allowing the academics to do this kind of wonderful research. Julia Wilkinson, who's a grad of our MCM program, who's the director of executive communications at Canadian Tire, did her capstone on corporate social advocacy, right? To speak or not to speak. What a fantastic capstone, because it looked at what are the decision-making frameworks that organizations should have in place to be able to make decisions about social issues on whether or not corporations should put their foot in it. So without that kind of relationship, without that kind of openness to this kind of research, the industry, would shrink.
Yeah. I mean, what a time, right? What a time for the industry, a time of transformation. And I think, as I said, sometimes transformation is a good thing, right? And sometimes thinking about how you can, grow your prospects, fill your funnel with new PR practitioners. It's I think going to be a good thing for the industry net. And it's going to require a little bit of strategic thinking and innovation on behalf of the industry and those involved. But I do think there are good things to come. And that leads me to my last question, which I think I know I want to be respectful of your time here, but I couldn't let you go without asking this. You said that in 2004 you're putting together your dissertation on what is the future of PR in Canada. So here we are, close to 20 years later. That's the question I'd love to ask you. So, what is the
Mm.
future of PR in Canada at a time when AI is disrupting every industry? What's your approach to PR in the next decade?
Yeah, well, I think in order for it to survive the next decade, it has to become a lot more strategic. It can't rest on just creative or just tactics. You know, practitioners, professionals now need to come fully baked with advice, counsel, ideas. They have to be understand the context in which organizations are operating in today. So if you don't know anything about tariffs, you better do a quick crash course on what tariffs are all about, how it's going to impact your business. If you don't understand what's at the root cause of what's happening in the United States, you need to understand it. We're in a provincial election. If you don't know anything about government, you need to understand that. We are at a crossroads in this country. Um, look and understand what supply chain means. What are disruptions in our supply chain? What have we learned since COVID? So the future of strategic communications really is in being able to provide strategic, contextually research evidence-based advice to leaders to help them make the decisions that will help them achieve the goals and objectives of the organization. That's where you're most important. Protect the reputation of the organization, prepare for the organization for its next crisis. Build the strength of internal communications within the organization so that communicate employees understand the mission, the vision, the value of the organizations. Lead change, help to lead change within it, and then know what the place of the organization is in these difficult times, and provide that advice. But it has to be evidence-based. It can't be, the risks today are so dramatic and so quick. When I was providing advice, in the late 80s and early 90s, impacts could take a week or 2 weeks to sort of figure out, come back to the organization. Today, they're minutes. And
Yeah.
so you can't go in thinking, well, we got time is on our side. Time is not on our side. So you have to be this amongst the smartest people in the room. You have to know your organization inside and out. You have to understand how your organization achieves its goals and objectives. If it's in the corporate world, you have to understand how it makes money at every point in that. And so spending time within the operations of the organization, you know, building friendships, asking them, really good questions about what are the challenges that they face. If you're not at the strategy development table, then do a quick lesson in it. Sit down with the people that are doing it. Tell me how I should be doing everything I do to help you achieve your. Um, the world is out of equilibrium today. And I did this big paper in 2006 about what I called finding the balance zone, right? Organizations operate efficiently and effectively when they're in perfect balance, but no organization is in perfect balance. And so your job is to help them find balance at some point, right? You've got unions. How do we communicate with the unions? You've got advocacy groups, activist groups. How do we communicate with them? Government regulations. And so you're playing this whole circle of stakeholders that nobody else in the leadership team is. They've got singular stakeholders. So you and the CEO have the same horizontality. How do you shape that into the programs that you develop for the organization and then the advice that you offer to the organization? That's how we survive over the next 10 years. And AI can't do that. AI can give us insights, but they can't give us the right the context or the texture, right? That's what it doesn't have. The texture is like, what did I wake up to today? Today is like, what's that idiot down south going to do? That's AI can't really, well, and probably won't because they don't allow it to tell me what my day is going to be like because Trump is, on a warpath about somebody else now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's such a great, I think, approach. I think that's a great overall thought to kind of wrap things up with. Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because when you think about the future of communications, part of it is having communicators become a little less siloed and a little more focused on holistically understanding the economy, the businesses that they work for, the way that their CEOs are thinking, the problems that are approaching the business from, an operational perspective, and not just thinking of it from a communications POV. It's broadening the scope of the lens and trying to truly understand what problems you're trying to solve, right? So I love that approach. I think it's very impactful, and it aligns well with what we were talking about earlier when it comes to the whole ethos of the MCM and preparing communicators for those senior roles. Well, Terry, this has been great. I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours. Such a great conversation. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to chat. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to kind of leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think be a good person, do good things, be humble, put up your hand, and do the best you can.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you for your guidance, your insight, your advice. And I really look forward to talking with you. So thank you.
You best. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to The Bottom Line with Erick Bauer. If you enjoyed the conversation, share it with someone who'd appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are on the way, and you won't want to miss what's next.